A man is strapped to a metal frame in a basement in Buenos Aires.
And through the walls, he can hear it. 70,000 people, screaming, singing, a whole country losing its mind with joy. The World Cup is happening, less than a mile away. He can hear every goal, every roar. The sound pours into the cell where they're breaking him. Outside those walls, confetti and glory. Inside them, electricity and darkness. Same city, same night, same country. And almost nobody watching the game has any idea the building is even there. I'm Cole, and this is Midnight Files. To understand how it got this dark, you have to go back, way back, long before the first whistle. Back in 1966, FIFA handed Argentina the 1978 World Cup, a dream, a soccer-obsessed country finally getting its turn to host the biggest tournament on Earth. Nobody could have guessed what Argentina would look like by the time the ball actually started rolling. Because by the 1970s, Argentina was coming apart at the seams. Inflation passed 300%, money turning to paper in people's hands. In the streets, left-wing guerrillas and right-wing death squads fought it out, and ordinary people got caught in the middle. Juan Perón, the old strongman, came back from exile, then died in office. His widow, Isabel, took over and lost control. And then came the morning that changed everything. March 24, 1976. The military rolls in. Tanks. Soldiers. They arrest President Isabel Perón and take her away in a helicopter. Congress, shut down. Unions, suspended. The Constitution, gone. At the top sits a thin, cold-eyed general named Jorge Rafael Videla. He calls it the process of national reorganization, a clean-sounding name, bureaucratic, almost boring. What it really means is a war, a secret one, against their own people. They called it the Dirty War. Here's how it worked. Late at night, or in broad daylight, a car would pull up, almost always the same one. A green Ford Falcon. No plates. Men would grab someone off the street or drag them out of their own bed, throw them in the trunk, and drive away. And that person would simply cease to exist. No arrest record. No trial. No body. Go to the police, they'd shrug. Ask the army, they'd say they'd never heard the name. Just gone. Erased. They had a word for these people. The disappeared. Los desaparecidos. Students, teachers, journalists, union organizers, artists, anyone on a list, anyone suspected of the wrong thoughts. You didn't have to do anything. Human rights groups would later say as many as 30,000 people vanished this way. An official government commission would name close to 9,000, and even they said the true number was higher. Both numbers point at the same nightmare. And the places they took them. They built secret prisons, hundreds of them, hidden inside ordinary buildings, scattered across the country. Torture centers where people were held, interrogated, and destroyed. The most infamous of them all had a name that sounded harmless. The Navy Mechanics School. In Spanish, ESMA. A place where naval officers were supposedly trained. In reality, around 5,000 people were dragged through its doors. Most never came out. And this is the part you have to hold on to, because it matters later. ESMA sat right in Buenos Aires, on a wide, elegant avenue, less than a mile from the giant stadium where the World Cup final would be played. Less than a mile. Now, here's where the soccer comes back in. Because the generals had a problem. The world was starting to notice. Reports of the disappeared were leaking out, and Argentina's image was rotting in front of a global audience. And then someone in the junta looked at the calendar and realized something. They were about to host the World Cup. The whole planet was going to be watching anyway. Billions of eyes. So why not control what they saw? Admiral Emilio Massera, one of the most ruthless men in the regime, put it plainly. Hosting the tournament would prove to the world that Argentina was a serious, trustworthy country and push back against all that criticism raining down from abroad. Within weeks, the junta made it official. The World Cup was now a matter of national interest. Translation? Spend whatever it takes to make Argentina look beautiful, peaceful, and proud, while the Ford Falcons kept rolling through the night. But even inside the regime, the World Cup became a snake pit. They put a general named Omar Actis in charge of running it. Actis looked at the plans and got nervous. The spending was insane. He wanted a modest tournament, tight budgets, careful accounting, and he scheduled a press conference to say so publicly. He never made it. On the morning of August 19, 1976, 2 days before the press conference, his car was ambushed on the way to work. Gunmen opened fire. He was dead on the spot. Officially, they blamed leftist guerrillas and left pamphlets at the scene from a group nobody had ever heard of. Almost nobody believed it, because the man who took his place was a Navy officer named Carlos Lacoste, ambitious, connected, close to Messi, and hungry for a spectacular, expensive tournament all along. Suspicion has pointed at the regime itself ever since. A general, murdered, so the money could flow. And flow it did. The final bill came in north of $500 million. Some say closer to 700. More than one Argentine called it a monument to corruption. New stadiums, upgraded airports, a massive new color TV broadcast tower, so the whole world could watch in bright, beautiful color. In the poor neighborhoods, the shantytowns the tourists and cameras might see, they sent in the bulldozers. Entire communities cleared out, thousands pushed out of sight, so the route from the airport to the stadium would look clean and modern and rich. Hide the poverty, hide the prisons, hide the disappeared, paint the whole country a shiny new color, just in time for kickoff. But you can't hide everything. Because while the generals were building their perfect picture, a small group of women started walking in a circle. It began with mothers whose children had vanished, women who had gone to every police station, every hospital, every government office, begging for answers, and getting nothing but locked doors and blank stares. And one by one, in the waiting rooms and the hallways, they started finding each other, realizing they weren't alone, that this was happening to hundreds of families, thousands. On April 30, 1977, 14 of them did something no one dared to do. They walked straight into the Plaza de Mayo, the grand public square in the heart of Buenos Aires, right in front of the presidential palace, and they stood there, demanding to know where their children were. The police told them they couldn't gather, couldn't just stand around. So the mothers started to walk, slowly, arm in arm, in a circle, around and around the square. They tied white scarves over their heads so they could find each other in a crowd. They pinned photographs of their missing kids to their chests. And every single Thursday, they came back. The government didn't know what to do with them, so they mocked them, called them Las Locas, the mad women, hoping the world would look away. The world did not look away, but the regime made them pay for it. Their leader was a woman named Azucena Villaflor. Her own son had been taken, and in December of 1977, she did something incredibly brave and incredibly dangerous. She helped publish a newspaper ad listing the names of the disappeared, right there in print, for everyone to see. That very same night, armed men came to her home, and Azucena Villaflor, the mother who led the search for the disappeared, was disappeared herself, taken to ESMA, and, it would later be discovered, thrown from a plane into the sea. Because that was the other secret, the final one, the death flights. Prisoners the regime wanted gone forever were drugged, loaded onto planes, flown out over the water, and pushed out, alive, into the ocean. No grave, no trace, just gone. That was the country hosting the World Cup. And not everyone abroad was willing to just show up and play along. In France, activists formed a committee to boycott the tournament. Their slogan cut right to the bone: no football in the concentration camps. They gathered over 100,000 signatures. Amnesty International ran its own campaign, with a line just as sharp: football yes, torture no. In the Netherlands, there was a serious push to stay home. The pressure was real. Journalists were asking hard questions. The generals were sweating. And then, the fear crept onto the field itself. Just days before the tournament,
the coach of the French national team was driving down a country road when armed men forced his car to stop and marched him into the woods. He fought them off and escaped, and later, it turned out the gun they'd held on him wasn't even loaded. A message, maybe, a warning. There were empty seats among the stars, too. West Germany's Paul Breitner flat out refused to go. And the greatest player of his generation, Johan Cruyff of the Netherlands, didn't play in the tournament. For years people assumed it was a political protest, until Cruyff finally revealed the truth. Armed men had tried to kidnap his family at gunpoint in their own home in Barcelona. He was done risking it.
But in the end, every team that qualified came. The boycotts fizzled. The show would go on. And Argentina had a team worth watching. Their coach was a tall, chain-smoking, left-leaning idealist named Cesar Luis Menotti. They called him El Flaco, the skinny one. He had a whole philosophy about how the beautiful game should be played. And he was building his squad around a fierce captain in defense, Daniel Passarella, and a long-haired striker with fire in his boots, Mario Kempes. But even here, politics reached in. Menotti was told he could really only bring one player from the big European clubs. One. That was Kempes. Everyone else had to come from home. And there was pressure, heavy pressure, coming down on that team from the men in uniform. Because the generals didn't just want Argentina to compete. They needed Argentina to win. June 1st, 1978. The tournament begins.
Videla himself stands up at the opening ceremony and calls it, with a straight face, a World Cup of peace, a festival of brotherhood. Right there beside him, as his personal guest, sits a very famous American, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The junta declares a national holiday, so no one has to miss a moment.
70,000 people fill the stands. Flags everywhere. The whole country holds its breath.
And while all of that is happening, a Dutch journalist quietly slips away from the stadium. He heads about 40 blocks across the city, to the Plaza de Mayo, to point his camera at the women in the white scarves, to make sure the world sees them too. Because that was the split screen of 1978, the party in the stadium, the mothers in the square, and, less than a mile from the biggest stage in sports, the cells of ESMA.
On the field, Argentina got through the first round, and then the tournament hit the stage that would haunt it forever.
Back then, the World Cup didn't go straight to a knockout bracket. After the first round, the top teams were split into two more groups, and the winners of those groups would meet in the final. Argentina landed in a group with Brazil, Poland, and Peru.
And it came down to the last day, to math. Brazil played earlier that day and won, which meant, by the time Argentina took the field, they knew exactly what they needed. To reach the final instead of Brazil, Argentina had to beat Peru. And not just beat them. They had to win by 4 clear goals. For goals, against a Peru team that had actually played well in this tournament, with a rock-solid goalkeeper, Argentina's biggest win all tournament had been by 2. Oh, and one more thing. Brazil had begged FIFA to make both final games kick off at the same time, so nobody had an unfair advantage. FIFA said no. So Argentina played at night, knowing the exact score they needed. And what happened in the hours before that game has been argued about for almost 50 years. The night before, according to reports, the security guards protecting Peru's hotel suddenly vanished, and Argentine fans surrounded the building, blasting car horns and chanting until the early morning, so the Peruvian players couldn't sleep. Then, on game day, the bus carrying the Peru team got mysteriously lost. Again and again. A 30-minute trip stretched into 2 hours. And then, minutes before kickoff, the door to the Peruvian locker room opened. In walked Jorge Videla, the dictator himself, and beside him, Henry Kissinger. Videla read the players a message of brotherhood between the Argentine and Peruvian peoples, supposedly from Peru's own military ruler. Warm words, friendly words. Some of the Peruvian players would later say it didn't feel warm at all. It felt like a threat. Years later, Kissinger's office said he had no memory of ever being in that locker room. The whistle blew, and Argentina came out like a storm. By halftime,
2-0. And in the second half, Peru just collapsed. Goal after goal after goal. Mario Kempes scored twice. Leopoldo Luque scored twice. 2 more from Tarantini and Houseman.
Final score? 6-0. Argentina had blown right past the number they needed. They were in the final.
And here's a detail almost too strange to believe. Peru's goalkeeper that night, the man who let in all 6, was named Ramon Quiroga. And Ramon Quiroga had been born in Argentina, in Rosario, the very city where the game was being played. The fingers pointed at him instantly. He has denied any wrongdoing to this day. Oh, and one more thing happened during that game. At the home of a government official who had dared to publicly attack the tournament's insane spending, a bomb went off, reportedly at almost the exact moment Argentina scored its 4th goal. So the whispers started, and they never stopped. Reports at the time and for years after alleged that right around this game, Argentina shipped tens of thousands of tons of grain to Peru, and that Argentine banks suddenly unfroze around $50 million in frozen Peruvian assets. Just days after the final, Argentina's government granted Peru a special credit.
And it went darker than money. A Peruvian former senator would later claim, in an Argentine human rights court, no less, that the whole thing was a secret deal. That in exchange for throwing the game, Peru's dictatorship quietly handed over more than a dozen Peruvian political prisoners to be disappeared in Argentina.
So, was the most famous blowout in World Cup history bought?
Here's the honest answer. Nobody has ever proven it. Not the grain, not the money, not the prisoners. And plenty of players from that Peru team have sworn, for decades, that there was no fix, that they were simply exhausted, outplayed, and beaten by a better side on the night. Some of their own teammates disagree and say they were pressured to lose. To this day, no one has produced the smoking gun. The mystery just sits there, unsolved. A question mark stamped forever onto a 6-0 scoreline.
But there was still one game left. June 25, 1978. The final, Argentina versus the Netherlands. The Estadio Monumental, less than a mile from ESMA.
And it started with mind games.
The Dutch players walked out onto the field, and then had to just stand there, waiting. Argentina didn't come out. Minutes ticked by. The crowd, whipped into a frenzy, roared louder and louder. When Argentina finally emerged, late, they immediately made a fuss about a small cast on the arm of a Dutch player. Anything to rattle them. Anything to feed the crowd. Then the ticker tape came down. A blizzard of white paper raining from the upper decks, swirling across the field, sticking to the players' legs. It looked like a dream. It looked unstoppable. Kempes struck first. Argentina, 1-0. But the Dutch didn't fold. Late in the game, they clawed back an equalizer. 1-1. And then, in the dying seconds of regular time, it happened. A Dutch forward named Rob Rensenbrink got the ball at his feet, with the goalkeeper beaten.
And the ball hit the post.
Inches. That's how close the Netherlands came to winning the World Cup. Inches to the left, and the whole story of that night is different. But it stayed out. And in extra time, Argentina finished them. Kempes again. Then Bertoni. 3-1. Final whistle.
Argentina, world champions, for the first time ever.
The stadium detonated. Grown men wept. A whole nation poured into the streets.
And the Dutch team? They walked off the field and refused to come back for the medal ceremony. They wouldn't stand there. Some of them later admitted why. They didn't want to shake the dictator's hand. But Videla got his moment anyway. The FIFA president came down and handed him the golden trophy. And Videla, the man who called this a World Cup of peace, lifted it up and passed it to his captain, Passarella. There's a famous photograph from that instant. Videla, grinning, a wide, satisfied smile. People who knew him said they never saw him smile like that, ever. Now, remember ESMA, less than a mile away. Inside those cells, the prisoners heard it. All of it. The roar of 70,000 people funneling through the walls. On a television, some of them watched the general celebrate, watched the trophy go up,
watched the country they loved go insane with joy over a soccer game, while they sat in the dark, waiting to find out if tonight was the night they'd be loaded onto a plane.
One survivor described that exact feeling. The sound of victory pouring into a torture center, the most beautiful moment in the country's history, and the ugliest, happening in the same city, on the same night, within walking distance of each other. That was the plan. That was the whole point. And for a little while, it worked. The regime got its beautiful pictures, the confetti, the trophy, the smiling faces beamed to the world. But confetti settles, and the machine kept running. The Ford Falcons kept driving. The disappearances went on for years after the last fan went home. And here's the thing about a lie that big. Eventually, it can't hold. Because those mothers never stopped walking. Every Thursday, circle after circle, refusing to let the world forget. By 1982, the regime was crumbling. The economy had collapsed. And in a desperate gamble to distract the country, the generals launched a war over the Falkland Islands. And lost it, badly, humiliated, broke, exposed. In 1983, it was over. Democracy came back, and now, finally, the country turned to look at what had really happened. A new government sent investigators after the disappeared. Thousands of testimonies, survivors, families. The report they produced carried a two-word title that became a promise carved into the nation's soul. Nunca más. Never again. Nearly 9,000 people. Named. Around 340 secret detention centers. Mapped. A whole machine of state terror. Laid bare in black and white. And then, something almost unheard of in history. They put the generals on trial. In a real courtroom. In front of the whole country. In 1985, the men who had run the juntas sat in the dock, Videla among them. And the lead prosecutor closed his case with those same two words. Nunca más. Videla and Messi got life. Others got long sentences too. Justice. Finally. Except, not quite. A few years later, a new president pardoned them, set them free. But the mothers kept walking, and Argentina refused to let it go. In the 2000s, the pardons were struck down and the cases reopened. Videla was hauled back into court. Again and again, and the crimes just kept coming out. The torture, the murders, and the most sickening of all, the stolen babies. Pregnant women taken to places like ESMA, kept alive just long enough to give birth, and then their newborns handed off to military families, raised by the very people who had destroyed their real parents. Hundreds of them. Children who grew up never knowing who they truly were. Videla was convicted for that too, and spent the rest of his life behind bars. In 2013, he died there, an old man in a cell, while the country he tried to control moved on without him. That torture center a mile from the stadium. Today, ESMA is a museum, a place of memory, recognized around the world as a site the whole of humanity should never forget. And the mothers, decades later, some of them are still there, still in the Plaza de Mayo. Still wearing the white scarves. So what do you do with a memory like 1978? Because here's the ache at the heart of it. For millions of Argentines, that World Cup was real joy. Not fake, not forced. They danced in the streets because they loved their team, and they loved their country. That happiness actually happened. And so did the horror. A mile away, at the exact same time. The players themselves have wrestled with it. One of the stars of that team said, years later, that knowing what he knows now, he can't call himself proud of that victory. Another defended it fiercely, said none of the players tortured anyone or killed anyone. They just gave a hurting country a little bit of joy, and he refuses to be ashamed of that. Both of those men are telling the truth, and that's what makes 1978 so hard to hold. It was the greatest night in Argentine sports history. And it was a smokescreen for one of the darkest crimes of the century. The confetti and the cells, the trophy and the death flights, the roar of the crowd, and the mothers, walking in a slow, endless circle, holding up photographs of the children the whole world was too busy cheering to see. Same city, same night, same country. And now, You know it was there.